children to regard the people who use violence as heroic, like, and admirable, and the acme of morality. Like, and it's hilarious is, this is something I've never heard in criticisms of Rand. And by the way, it's also funny that if you agree with someone 99% of the time, you're not going to talk about that 99%. There's no point. It's kind of redundant. And you disagree about the 1%, then it sounds like you hate them. It's like, no. I'm only talking about the part I disagree with, because everything else is like, yep, yep. Rand in Atlas Shrugged, she's a cop killer. Like, they go to rescue John Galt, spoiler alert, and there's a guard there, and the guard's like, oh, I don't know, and they shoot him. Yeah. He wasn't even really being like a bad cop. He really was just following orders and had no mind, wasn't thinking, and they're like, all right, boom, and no regrets. So that's kind of interesting that's in there, and she's been criticized for that scene.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's an interesting place that you find yourself in. Is being a libertarian at all, being an anarchist, and what is justified to do against an agent of the state, and what isn't. But you know, a lot of times, and Rothbard did directly take this on, where he, not in Anatomy of the State, I don't believe, but in other writing, where he said that, you know, because I hear this a lot from people, where they'll bring up, in many cases, much like with the Rand example, they'll bring up a concern that is a legitimate concern. Like, that's okay, yeah, we'd have to figure this out. That's a fair point. But then by bringing up the concern, they act like, and that's why this is over. That's why your whole experiment is done, because I just thought of this concern. So can't possibly be addressed. Don't even, think about it. But so like, I'll hear people say, okay, well, even if you had an ANCAP society tomorrow, if we were able to abolish the state, well, all of the big money people, like let's say all of the Rockefeller, types, the Rothschilds of the world, they're just going to start putting their money together to propagandize people to create a new state. And it's like, yes, that is a very legitimate concern. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. This probably would happen, and that's something we got to think about and deal with. But they'll present that as like, and they're destroyed anarcho-capitalism. And you're like, if you're saying the worst thing about anarcho-capitalism is that it could lead us back to not having anarcho-capitalism, that's not much of an argument against anarcho-capitalism.
I have said this many times, and I'm going to be using this line a lot. I don't have the phrasing exactly right in front of me, but it is inevitably the case that what is presented to be the strongest argument against anarchism is in fact a description of the status quo. Someone was like, well, with your competing defense agencies, the people who's the most ruthless in using power are the ones who are going to get to the top. Unlike now.
Right.
Like, what? Are you serious? So there's lots of examples like this where it's just under anarcho-capitalism, if you went before a judge, you're not going to know what the decision's going to be. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, does that sound familiar?
It really is unbelievable, and particularly when the concern is that some group of people could just have a whole bunch of guns and then they could tyrannically oppress you. And you're like, dude, I mean, what do you there are people out there serving 30 years for dealing pot. Like, because a whole bunch of people have the guns and there's nothing they can do, and they decided this plant was illegal, and now your life's ruined.
Or what about under anarcho-capitalism, people be shooting each other in the street? Yeah. And what? Right.
It's as of where there's only what do we have, like 12,000 a year? It's
amazing.
It's like, right. So the question is not ever, can your system provide no one being shot in the street, right, or would people be shot in the street in your system? The question is it likely to believe that less people would be shot in the street than in this system? And
why people be more likely to be caught and punished and dealt with?
Yes, exactly. Okay, so was there anything else about the book that stood out to you or that you particularly liked or disliked?
No, I mean, I can see how, but again, as I'm reading this, I'm like, it was hard for me to wrap my head around trying to imagine reading this when I didn't know this stuff.
That is what I predicted. when you went into reading it, is that I thought it's kind of like Anatomy of the State is the pamphlet that I recommend to people where they're like, hey, I checked out a couple of your podcasts and like I thought it was kind of interesting. Anything I should like read to do that? I'm like, read this. This is like because it's easy to get through. It's 60 pages. You can sit down and read it in one sitting or two sittings at most, and it gets the central points out there. But when you said you were going to read it,
the Mitt Romney autobiography.
Yeah. But that you got to dive deep into. That's like stuff. If you're ready to really blow your mind, okay? This guy thinks that Iran is a real problem that we have to deal with. And this is, you're like, yeah, it's no, but I kind of knew, I was like, I think that this is going for you, gonna, to some degree be like learning the ABCs or something like that. You're going to be like, yeah, I mean, obviously this is the foundation.
But this is also why I yell at people, don't you dare read The Fountainhead after Atlas Shrugged, because I think The Fountainhead is a superior novel, but a lot of it is going to be beaten into your head by Atlas Shrugged, and you're going to be missing out a lot on reading it first. So definitely make sure you read The Fountainhead before Atlas Shrugged.
And she wrote The Fountainhead before.
Yes, 43,
Atlas Shrugged, right?
And Atlas Shrugged is 57, yeah.
Okay. And those were, and that's, it's funny because like that was at the time almost like the only game in town of what would change people's minds to even like look at the world this way. And now it's almost hard to like imagine that. I mean, it's hard to imagine a nation of people who read novels, but it's hard to imagine now with like, the internet and all this shit that there would be like, well, this is all we got. Please read these novels.
And I got to give people credit. Economics in One Lesson.
Yeah,
it's the other one.
Well, that's another one I recommend very early. That's a real like economic red pill to me. Where once you see that, it's very hard to not see.
Well, the premise is the red pill. The premise is the blue pill is what you see. The red pill is that wherever you're seeing, there's something you're not seeing. Yes,
and it makes it very easy to bat down silly kind of pop progressive economic arguments. So like, and they're made because people haven't, read that book or haven't taken that red pill, where they're made all the time. I remember I was in a debate with a progressive, and he said to me at one time that Social Security is the most positive or the most successful policy that Americans have ever had. And he said that he goes, his example was that through the Great Recession, that old people would have been this much more in poverty if they didn't have Social Security. But now they're up here because of Social Security. And so there. I mean, obviously, that's a success. And this was a sincere argument, like a sincere, well, look, I mean, if they weren't getting the checks, they'd have that checks much less money. And you're like, right, but who was taxed to pay them that check? Oh, young people, a way poorer group than old people. So you're taking from a poorer group to give to a wealthier group. And this is just, I mean, it's just, if you read Economics in One Lesson, it's just, it becomes second nature to just think of things that way.
What about the fact that those old people could have been investing that money their entire lifetime?
Well, right. Yes, that's another point too. You just start to look at this is the seen benefit, but where did this come from? What was the unseen? That is our episode for today. Michael Malice has officially read Anatomy of the State. The Elders of Zion will be next. That's the next one we're pushing you on. So anyway, all right. Always good to talk to you, brother. I'll see you soon. Thanks for listening, everyone. Peace.
Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Hey guys, today's show is brought to you by the Death to Tyrants podcast. It's a hardcore libertarian and cat podcast out of Austin, Texas, hosted by longtime musician and libertarian Buck Johnson. Buck played drums with the great Jimmy Vaughn at many of the Ron Paul rallies back in 2008 and 2012, and he's been a libertarian for 2 decades. Buck comes from the Rothbardian Misesian wing of the liberty movement, just like us. He's interviewed many of the top voices in this world, including Lou Rockwell, Tom Woods, Jeff Dice, Scott Horton, Mark Thornton, a lot of other great ones. He gets red-pilled guests from other perspectives, like the great paleoconservative Paul Gottfried, feminist Megan Murphy, InfoWars reporter Joe Biggs, and journalist Peter Van Broen. He's really got a terrific podcast. He's a huge proponent of secession and decentralization and regularly discusses these topics, as well as foreign policy, the police state, leftist authoritarianism, many other interesting podcasts. If you're looking for another great libertarian podcast out there, look no further than the Death to Tyrants podcast. The podcast drops every Monday and can be found on any of the podcast platforms out there. Go check it out at deathtotyrants.libsyn.com. We're going to play a quick clip from the show at the end of today's podcast, so make sure you stick around to listen to that. All right, let's start the show.
We need to roll back the state. We spy on all of our own citizens. Our prisons are flooded with nonviolent drug offenders. If you want to know who America's next enemy is, look at who we're funding right now. Every single one of these problems are a result of government being way too big.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand spanking new episode of Part of the Problem. I, of course, am the most consistent motherfucker you know, Dave Smith, and I'm joined not only by audio, but also by video, which really brings it all together. You're a video medium type of guy, Rob. I got to see that beautiful put 'em. Robbie the Fire Bernstein, the king of the cocks. What's up, my brother?
People have always said that about me. They're like, video is what's going to get you to pop.
Here's what I like about you, Rob. You're back on video. Now we see you again. You don't even try to make your bed. You don't even pretend. You don't even throw it over in a way that doesn't obviously look like you just rolled out of it. Towels on the door. Who gives a shit? We're living in the lockdown.
I mean, this is pretty clean for me. I'm showing it off. Hey guys, look at this. It's not that shitty.
Your bookshelf looks like you were just raided by the FBI and they were looking for information. They're just tossing your fucking books all over the place. Where is it? It's got to be in here somewhere.
I don't know what you're talking about. That's an organized bookshelf. It's all on there. They're in sections.
You have a room that, after you kill a bunch of people and write a manuscript, that's what I'd expect to come back. But not manuscript. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know the word either. But that letter with all your big ideas. Yes, that's what I'm going for. God, we're stupid in the morning. We're recording a little bit earlier than manifesto is the word I was looking for. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about to start off today's show was there has been a big wave of tech censorship that's happened just really in the last 24 hours. And it's one of these things that's kind of one of the more eerie aspects to tech censorship is when they seemingly happen in coordination. So it's not just if we just existed in a world where, there are these rules. If you get caught breaking the rules, you get kicked off a platform. I wouldn't even necessarily be completely against that if I thought the rules were within reason and were applied equally or, something like that. But it's a little bit weird when you see multiple different channels getting kicked off and then this new development of subreddit groups getting scrubbed. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not a new development, but I haven't heard of that before. And certainly not of huge subreddit groups like the Donald got scrubbed. And they're, I know as we've been talking about for a long time, I know that this is in many ways a difficult area for libertarians. I've been disappointed in how a lot of libertarians have responded to these type of occurrences. But I think that most people, when you go back to the Alex Jones example, most people, if you get kicked off of Facebook, but you're on Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, all these other things, it's kind of all right, Facebook didn't want to have you anymore. But with the Alex Jones thing, what was really remarkable and terrifying about it was that he, in a matter of days, got kicked off of Twitter, Facebook, PayPal, Patreon, iTunes, everything kicked him off. And it's very clear, Alex Jones is, sure, he says some crazy shit, but he's been saying crazy shit for years. They didn't all just decide to kick him off independently within a few days. I'm not great with math, but statistically, the odds of that would be like 1 in a billion, that they all just happened to decide in these few days to kick him off for something that he did 5 years ago, supposedly. And that, I think no matter what your ideology is, you have to admit that gets a little bit creepy. When all of these companies can get together and decide, we're having a purge, we're kicking people off. That's a dangerous situation. And I think you're more or less in agreement with me that there's something pretty creepy about tech censorship.
Yeah, it's almost like getting fired from the office on a Friday. They seem to do it in tandem so that, how much complaining can you do? You're off of all the platforms, and then like no one can go after any one of them, as a singular entity. But it really does feel like someone's getting orders from above when they all do it in coordination.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just, like I was talking about this with Michael Malice the other day on his show, but it's like you'll get some of these responses, and the responses range from libertarians. I would say it ranges from people who are like, well, these companies shouldn't be treated as or they should be treated as publishers. If they want to go in and start, being editors, then they shouldn't get the protection that they have. And people who, are more or less where I'm at, where they're just kind of like outraged by it, and they're like, "This sucks, and we should complain about it." Then there's a whole bunch of people who take the it's a private business, they can do whatever they want to. And then on the kind of left libertarian end of the spectrum, there's people who are cheering it on. Like, this is the market solving, the problem of racism or whatever. I'll say that, what Malice said, which I thought was a good point, was that the idea that they're a private business, they can do whatever they want to. I mean, even if you legally believe that certainly doesn't mean that we can't harshly criticize them for what they're doing and try to put pressure on them. And what Malice said, which was a pretty entertaining example, was he said it'd be like if you went out to dinner and your food was like freezing cold, and your friend turned to you and went, "Well, they're a private business. I mean, they can do whatever they want to." And you're like, "Well, yeah, I could still be upset if I ordered hot food and it came out cold, right?" So the fact that they're a private business, or whether you think laws should be written, or what can be done to help the situation, isn't the end of the discussion.
It's also an interesting question. I don't have any expertise on this one, but to what extent these really are just private public companies? And
that's a good. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
How much government monopoly power has either been given to them, or how much government funds were given to these companies at the origin so that they could even invest in themselves and grow the way that they did? Which becomes more of a question: is this some sort of a government thing that's really just censoring thought?
Yeah, and personally, I'm not against libertarians, or anyone for that matter, but particularly just speaking about libertarians. I'm not against libertarians having, how do I describe this? So if you go like, okay, we're against this whole system, but given this system exists, this is better than this. Like, I'm not against having that. I think you should keep clear that we're against the whole system. You know what I mean? Like, we might be against public schools and think that the government shouldn't be in the business of indoctrinating children, and that you don't want to give a monopoly, a violent monopoly, the power over forcing your children into their education camps. I'm against public schools with every fiber of my being. That being said, if someone goes, public schools are now teaching 2 + 2 = 5, I would go, I prefer them teaching 2 + 2 = 4. Does that make sense? So I can prefer one thing, even though I'm against the whole system.
And the cheerleaders should be good looking. None of this fat cheerleader thing. That new liberal movement that anyone can be a cheerleader.
Doesn't do anything for anyone. Doesn't help the kids. Doesn't help that fat girl. Doesn't help the boys. Certainly doesn't help that hot girl who was supposed to be a cheerleader. Come on, guys.
You got to set those standards early so that
I'm talking about schools with 18 and up people.
Oh,
anyway, I don't know. I'm shook over this Crystalia thing. I was not in any way suggesting young. Anyway, my point is, it's okay to say even within this bad system, we can have a preference to one way of running it versus the other. And I think it is on libertarians to not then fall into the trap of just being like, public schools should be teaching 2 + 2 = 4. It's like, well, no, our actual position is that we should abolish public schools. But while we're here, we can talk about that. And certainly there is something to be said for like, okay, so let's say we took the example, which I like to use the example because it's the most potent one, and it is something that's really happened. But let's say we're talking about financial companies discriminating against people, you know, and there's lots of people out there like Alex Jones and other types of people like that who, you know, can't get, you know, Visa or MasterCard to process their payments, can't get, you know, like whatever. Okay, so let's say you have big banks who are like, we're not going to let you open a checking account if you know, are, I don't know, a gun rights activist. Let's just say. I mean, I don't know an example of that happening, but it's really not that much of a stretch from what we've already seen. But let's say you had that situation where, you know, Bank of America, Chase, TD Bank, like the big banks are like, you cannot open an account and bank with us if you support the Second Amendment on your Twitter page, okay? Now, obviously, if you're looking to the ultimate libertarian answer, like abolish public schools, well, the answer here is that we should abolish the Federal Reserve and all of the regulations and all of these different government rules that create a situation where there's only a few big banks. And this is very obvious. I mean, even after Dodd-Frank was passed, there were consolidations in the banking industry because when you know, this is basic libertarian stuff, but when you make the rules so incredibly difficult to you know, comply with, only the big guys can handle the costs of compliance. And so you don't have a bunch of competition. There's no question to me that in a libertarian society, we'd have many more companies in the banking industry, and so that would probably solve this problem.
You also have giant licensing laws in banking industry. Yeah. The biggest being that if you're not a giant bank, you're not getting FDIC. Mm-hmm. So it goes. I mean, I guess that might fall into your category of compliance, but yeah. Yeah,
no, more or less. I'm speaking very broadly in terms of regulation and compliance, and also the fact that you're not in bed with the Federal Reserve. You're not going to get their free money. That's pretty hard to compete. Like if you're in the business of actually like savings and loans, and I'm in the business of getting free money and loaning it out, probably I'm going to outcompete you. You know, and if I don't, I'm really bad. But. So even though, so that might be the correct answer, and in fact, I'm convinced it is the correct answer. However, much like saying we think public schools should teach 2 + 2 = 4, not 5, is it reasonable to say that while these banking companies are essentially, I mean, they may not be technically state, you know, state-run companies or state-chartered companies, but they're basically, right, like they're completely in bed with the Federal Reserve, with the FDIC, with all of these, like the big regulatory state. I don't think it's unreasonable for a libertarian to say, okay, our ideal goal is abolish public schools. Our ideal goal is abolish the Federal Reserve, abolish the FDIC, abolish all these regulations. But if you're going to have what is essentially a state-chartered bank, you can't discriminate. I don't think that's unreasonable to say, no, you know what? As long as this is part of the government in some pretty direct way, then no, you can't not bank with someone because you don't like their politics. You don't have a right to discriminate off political grounds. I don't think that's crazy unreasonable. It's to me falls in the range of public schools should teach the truth. Like public schools should teach real math. I don't think there's some like contradiction. I think it's just prioritizing values and going, okay, well, this is our top value, but as long as we can't have that, it is reasonable to expect them to do that. And likewise, I don't know, with these, you know, social media companies who, as you kind of alluded to, all of them are in bed to one degree or another with the government. You know, we don't all know exactly how extensively it is, but like they all work with our government and other governments. I understand people not wanting them to be allowed to just kick people off because they have wrongthink. And then aside from that, even if you can't get there, go ahead.
Going off that, because I think that's probably the best idea I've heard so far. It's basically saying that politics should be protected speech. And so, you know, the same way I have to hire, you know, African Americans in my business, or I can't get rid of you because you believe in abortion rights or gay rights, which, by the way, A lot of these things were political views at one point. Now it might be accepted thought, but if I was a conservative business, I might not want the person. Like, imagine if I was a conservative Christian business and there's a lady who spends every weekend advocating for abortions. That I can't not hire that person because of her views on abortions. I'm not allowed to do that. But what's interesting is that, I guess, in like the larger framework of society, conservatives or even more extreme ideas, we've lost the battle on free speech, that people think that some of these ideas are dangerous, so that even if you conceded, hey, government should be able to protect these things as free speech, you're not all of a sudden going to have, like, that extends to straight up racist points of view. Like, that's what free speech means. It means everyone gets a voice and you're not allowed to get rid of people. But that's already been lost because there's this idea of like that some ideas are toxic or that some ideas are dangerous and that they'll lead to violence, and so therefore that's why we need the censorship. That's why we need the censorship, but that already concedes that there's a need for censorship over free speech. You kind of can't have both.
Sure. And look, I understand where, like, and there's a reason why I kind of built my argument on those levels, like going from public schools to the big banks and then to social media companies. And I understand where there's some libertarians who can't get on board with the last leg of that. They go, they're not government companies in the same way that the big banks are, and certainly not in the same way that public schools are. And you could make a coherent argument that says, I think people have a right to discriminate. I think that conservative business has a right to discriminate against the pro-abortion activists, and Twitter has a right to discriminate against, people who they don't like.
We don't allow it.
Yes, well, right. Well, I'm just saying. So, but if you were to take the libertarian purist position that they all should be allowed to, I can respect that. But I think you would at least have to acknowledge strategically, this is not good. And wouldn't you at least think that you could speak out and say, I actually, like what you were just kind of getting at, I can't believe that this isn't such an easy argument to win. Like, I can't believe that people have given up on the idea of free speech. That it's like, look, I don't know. There are lots of ideas out there that I find abhorrent, like just horrible ideas, whether they're political or non-political. There's, but if we're just sticking within the political, I mean, whatever. There's obviously me and you, there could be some like tanky who's supporting Bernie Sanders and criticizing him for not being, communist enough. And they're fucking, like this hardcore, we should have this revolution. But I would never even dream of having some desire to get their YouTube channel shut down or to get a publishing company to not publish their book, or because even, like where you could see some short-term strategic benefit to that, wouldn't you go, well, look, first of all, I don't think there's a long-term strategic benefit to that, because now we've set this precedent that we can ban books or ban speech that we don't like. And then on top of that, you're like, I just don't want to live in that society. I want to live in the society where everybody can make their argument and we can hear lots of interesting different voices and let the best argument win. All right, let's take a quick second. I want to thank our awesome sponsor for today's show, which is iTrust Capital. With iTrust Capital, you can buy cryptocurrency and physical metals in an IRA, which means you can start trading your crypto tax-free. I know a lot of people who listen to this show are really into crypto. I'm a big fan of owning physical gold, and we all know how much money the Fed has been printing lately. The possibility of inflation and the need to preserve your wealth is very real. Now, if you're playing the crypto game and Bitcoin goes through the roof, with iTrust Capital, you can trade tax-free and actually keep all of your gains. And if thus far you haven't been investing in crypto, iTrust Capital makes investing in crypto safe and easy. You can log into your account 24/7 and trade crypto at the push of a button. No keys or confusion. Crypto can be traded the same as any other asset. Same thing for trading physical metals. iTrust Capital is IRS compliant and has worked out all the legal complexities of trading your crypto tax-free. And the best part, iTrust Capital is 90% cheaper than their competitors. Check it out. Their fees are incredibly low. They're fans of investing in crypto and physical metals and wanted to build a platform that would be accessible to everyone with transparent pricing. So if you're looking for an IRA to trade crypto or gold tax-free, go to itrustcapital.com. If you use the promo code POTP, your first month is absolutely free. One more time, itrustcapital.com, promo code POTP for your first month free. All right, let's get back into the show.
To go off your book example, though, and then I want to tie it into the social media, maybe just give kind of the opposite side argument on this, because I see it from both sides. But let's say that you take the book example. Like, let's say someone was writing some, like, super anti-Semitic book that said, you know, really came out and said...
I am. It should be out next year.
So I can understand if Jews were to go to Simon Schuster and go, hey, like, if you guys publish, like, we're not buying your textbooks anymore. Now, for government to say, hey, no company can publish this book, I don't think that should exist. But for you to go to a publisher and say, hey, I really think it's not appropriate for you to publish it, I think that's fair. And then it would be fair of the publisher not to publish it. Now, what's interesting, what's going on in the social media landscape is you have companies that are starting to pull advertising dollars off of these platforms because they say they're not doing enough to make sure that it's not a climate for racists or whatever the hell they're saying. So now, as to why in hell companies like Procter & Gamble are inserting themselves into the political landscape and they're starting to have political opinions is really scary. And we can address that in a second, because I think conservatives should be fighting back and going, fine, you guys want to step in and start having political opinions that are against mine, like, you know, because you're shutting down it's free speech. It's not that conservatives are pro being racist, but that's the bullshit by which they frame this stuff. Anyways, I understand that you go, hey, I'm Facebook, I want to make advertising dollars here, and now all of a sudden I got companies that say they don't want to be on this platform because they've taken the liberal bullshit hook, line, and sinker, and these are the people that complain, and these are the people that are willing to listen, so we want to make this a, you know, fucking friendlier environment for advertisers to participate in. So I understand it's like they're a business. You're trying to run your Facebook business where everyone can hang out, and you want to make as much money there off of advertisers. And if all of a sudden letting, you know, groups with alternative opinions exist on your platform is going to affect your bottom line, I get it. Fucking throw them out. But we can all take a look back and go, no, this is a platform for fucking censorship. And what's even going on with these big companies that, you know, your giant companies are starting to step in on this? Like, I don't believe for 1 second with the amount of government money that's just floating around, and you see the relationship between private company. Like, I think even what we're looking at as being a free market and going, hey, this is being influenced by bullshit, fucking bull. Like, no, there's some big top, you know, coming down the line agenda of, like, look at it, the Fed is buying bonds right now. They're fucking propping up Philip Morris. They're making sure that they're going to be, that cigarette companies can continue to finance their debt. You don't believe for 1 second
after a war on vaping for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's as simple as some senator who's top of whatever policy. I think that's this coordinate can call someone up and go, like, listen, you think you're getting that financing project? You got to do Facebook to make sure that they're selling me their data. That's what's really going on here, you know? So it's a really tough, like, to be bigger picture about what the fuck is going on here. It's hard to really evaluate what might be fair and how the free market might be interacting, because there's so much Fed money in the game, like, and just government money in the game. It's hard to know what I don't think fucking companies would be getting involved in this whatsoever. I think even Facebook would rather not be.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think the bigger picture is that the state poisons everything, and I think that you're right that it's almost like there isn't any true free market at all, so we don't really know how companies would be acting if it wasn't for all of the different, you know, political, cultural pressures that come along, and of course all of these things happening right now, to the examples we were talking about. You can't remove it from the fact that this is a presidential election here. I mean, it's very obvious that people who, you know, like, might be on what the media class considers the wrong side of this election are the ones who are being censored.
And they're censoring Trump. I mean, you got to take a step back and realize how insane that is. You have the president, the most powerful person,
he has
is
the
not
nuclear
even
football.
able. Right. He's not even able to express his point of views. So what hope is there for the rest of us? That guy should have more power than anyone to kick these fucking companies around. How is that possible that guy gets censored and labeled with all these bullshit nonsense terms, which are just vehicles for censorship? Like that, I mean, there's your proof right there that these are not, like, open platforms.
Yeah. No, look, I also just responding to what you said, and I get your point. Like, truthfully speaking, the system that I would want to live under would be a pure free market. And if somebody's offended by somebody's book, They can put pressure on the publisher and say, well, we won't buy any of your books if you publish this book. Okay. I do think, however, that would be a weapon, for lack of a better term, that should be wielded very responsibly. Very responsibly. You should not just go out there for any book that's a little bit controversial. Like, I just really wouldn't. I don't know. And to me, my personal preference would be, even if it was something like, let's say there was somebody who was writing a book on Holocaust denial or something. Here, this is my evidence why I don't think the Holocaust happened. You'd be like, okay, let me get 10 copies and start distributing them. No, kidding. But my response would be like, okay, so write a book debunking this and take it apart. Since we have the truth on our side, take it apart piece by piece. Show why all their evidence is wrong. That's just more my personal preference than let's get this book shut down. I'm a free speech guy, but I believe in property rights above all else and self-ownership and all that stuff. So, okay, fine. But at least strategically, can people not see a problem? Like libertarians, talking to you, can you not see a problem where that tool, if you will, is being wielded so recklessly that it's just the accusation of racist, which can be applied to basically anyone in today's day and age. And then that's going to be the justification for why you get taken down, or hate speech. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit is, look, again, there were people who I'm not big fans of who were taken down in this recent purge. But I do stand by saying, like, yeah, I think even those guys, I don't really want to see their YouTube pages taken down.
Who are some of the ones that?
Richard Spencer's,
right.
Got taken down, and so I think Richard Spencer's. I don't know that much about him, and I hate to do the thing where I'm like speaking about somebody who, I'm kind of going off of how they're characterized in the mainstream, and I know how unfairly some people are characterized. But I've had a couple conversations with Richard Spencer. I've seen some of his